All right, let's go ahead and bring in former FBI investigator now, Bill Daly. Bill, the list of things we don't know this hour is longer, much longer than the things we do know. There was some reporting earlier in the day that the suspect was wearing an MTA uniform. That has been clarified. We now know he was wearing some kind of a construction outfit. The big question remains as to whether he was an employee, a former employee, or in any way connected to the MTA. When you take a look at this guy's profile, tell us what kind of a difference that could make if this is indeed some kind of an inside job or not.
Yeah, and I do think it's a bit too early to kind of suggest that. Unfortunately, a lot of the equipment, whether it's a vest or whatever this person was wearing at the time, could easily be gotten by individuals just on the internet or in maybe some secondhand store. So I hate to try to draw any immediate conclusion as to his dress, as to exactly who he was representing, if anyone. So I do think there's some things to be said, and kind of building on what Commissioner Kelly just said, is that this individual has gone out and actually purchased a gun or acquired a gun. There seems to be some type of gas canister, which is not something we all kind of easily have in our garage. It's something you need to go out and make efforts to get. So there was certainly an intent, and that's something just somebody woke up this morning thinking that they're going to carry this out. There's some planning to it. Yeah. So whether there was the vest or whatever else this person was wearing was part of that disguise that was given some thought to, I would probably think it was. And I think that's why we don't want to draw too much as to what he was wearing, as to who he might be, either have.
But Bill, to clarify, if he is or is not in any way connected to that MTA, does that change the calculus for investigators? Does it change anything about the way they're looking at this?
Well, certainly. I think what things don't want to rule out is the fact that this person was not part of the employee base, and maybe there was some type of a workplace issue at hand. But I think right now they're trying to put a very broad net around this investigation, try to find out where this individual is right now, so he doesn't harm any additional people. I'd also suggest is that there's some other things to be looking at, and I'm sure they are, besides kind of the video surveillance of the immediate area, which I understand the camera was not working there. However, as Commissioner Kelly said, there are multiple stops, about 272 on the subway system. Many of them do have cameras. Where this person entered into the system will be very important, as well as perhaps their social media profile. I mean, there's somebody out there who knows this person, whether this person has kind of put this forward as being aspirational, that they're going to carry out some type of act against the subway, or using some type of gas or some type of gas mask. There are a variety of things that can be searched that maybe will give the police, the FBI, federal authorities who are working in concert on this some way to identify who this person is very, very quickly. However, there are some things, as Commissioner Kelly said, may take a while. This may be not an instant kind of maybe a TV movie where we find out today who the person is. We hope it is. But it may take a while for some of the forensics and some of the investigation into what this person carried, that canister perhaps that had gas in it, et cetera, and try to tie that back to an individual.
Right. Hey, it's John Roberts here, Bill. I've been looking online, and it looks like you can get gas canisters online, but it does take, as you pointed out, some effort here. Forensically speaking, when we look at trying to track down who the suspect may be, I go back again to 1993 and the first World Trade Center bombing, when the FBI found a serial number on one of the parts of that van in which the explosives were loaded. I expect that they'll be combing the subway car, the subway platform for any little tiny clue that they can trace back. In the World Trade Center bombing, though, they had pieces of a vehicle, as miraculous as it was that they managed to find it. But I expect that the clues here will be far smaller.
I would suggest the same, is that, as you said, we have the canister. Perhaps it was left behind. If there was anything else that was left in the haste of the commission of this crime, they'll be picking those up. As Commissioner Kelly said, there are already, gun casings that were found. Certainly give them a sense as to the caliber of the weapon that's being used. So there are some things that can be looked at, but yeah, I don't suspect that unless it is a quickly identifiable, purchase of one of these items, a gas mask, a canister, a workman's vest or a construction vest, which are very, very easily available if not found in a dumpster. Those other things could be quickly used to identify who this person is. But you're right, there may not be some aha moment immediately. It may take a while for this to be uncovered.
Bill, this is Jillian again. Talk to me about the investigatory part of the process underway right now by the FBI. Presumably, they want to build, as you said, a profile of this suspect. So I would imagine they're looking at social media, phone and email records, contacts, family, his travel. How do they build out a profile of this suspect? What else are they trying to get at here?
And first off, right now, the FBI is acting in a supportive role to the NYPD in providing assistance as they can, whether from a technological standpoint, forensic standpoint. But the NYPD is quite sophisticated in a number of those areas as well. So they provide assistance. But yeah, I mean, profiling the individual will kind of give you an idea as to, as we're discussing here, whether this is something that is carried out by a deranged individual or somebody who has some type of ideological component to them carrying out this crime. And so they'll be looking to kind of look at that. But the immediate issue is trying to find out where this person is. And that will require really boots on the ground. I mean, we're certainly hoping that if somebody knows of somebody who is speaking about carrying out this act, or knows of somebody who is buying a gas canister or a gas mask, or seem to kind of fit this kind of immediate profile of the individual, that they call in with that information. So there's a good chance that somebody knows this person and is coming in contact with them, but also just canvassing the area, trying to understand if you have any eyewitnesses upon his departure from the subway system. We're assuming it's at that train stop, where he went, and try to find out very quickly how they can kind of identify him and bring him to justice.
Bill, very quickly, we got about 15 seconds here. We're now 5 hours after the shooting took place. Does it surprise you that they don't have the suspect in custody yet?
Not very surprising, given some of the dimensions of this incident, where it started off and appears to be kind of maybe moving subways and kind of the mass and number of people who will be leaving the platforms, and also given some of the non-immediate identifiable mechanisms, meaning kind of cameras to capture this person's image. He was wearing gas masks. There are certain things here that may take a while. I liken it sometimes with a bank robbery, where people can, with a mask, commit a crime. You may not be able to get them in the afternoon, but eventually you'll get them.
Well, let's hope that eventually comes sooner rather than later. Bill Daly, thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. We appreciate your expertise.